It started with Professor John. Everyone called him that. Never just John, always Professor John. He taught one of my core subjects. I remember the first day of class clearly because nothing felt wrong about it. The room smelled faintly of old books and cleaning solution. Sunlight hit the chalkboard at an angle that made his writing glow. He smiled when he spoke. Not the kind of smile that shows teeth too eagerly, but a gentle one. The kind that made you feel like he was listening even before you spoke. "College can be overwhelming," he said that day, resting his hands on the desk. "If any of you need guidance, academic or personal, my door is always open." Girls whispered about how kind he was, how patient, how different from other teachers who barked orders and rushed through lessons. When he spoke to female students, his voice softened just slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to feel safe. I noticed that. I liked that. The first time he spoke to me directly, it was after class. I had dropped my notebook, pages scattering across the floor. Before I could kneel, he was already there, helping me gather them. "Claire," he said, reading my name from the paper. "You take very neat notes." I laughed awkwardly, embarrassed. "It helps me remember things." "That's a good habit," he replied. "You'll go far if you keep it." That sentence stayed with me for days. You have no idea how powerful encouragement feels when you're young and unsure of yourself. It felt like being seen. That was when I noticed Paul for the first time. He wasn't near us. He wasn't speaking. He was standing by the door, motionless, like he had been carved into the frame itself. Tall, thin. His eyes were fixed on us, not on me, not exactly, but on Professor John. I remember feeling irritated. Who just stands there watching people? When Professor John looked up, Paul turned away immediately and left without a word. "Don't mind him," Professor John said gently, as if he had sensed my discomfort. "Paul keeps to himself. Brilliant mind, but troubled." That was the first label placed on Paul. Troubled. Over the next few weeks, I noticed him more often. Always alone. Always quiet. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then his answers were short, clipped, like he was afraid of saying too much. People started calling him the weirdo. Some said he had anger issues. Others said he was obsessed with crime stories. I never asked him myself. Why would I? I had no reason to doubt what everyone already believed. Then the rumors started. A girl from another department stopped coming to class. At first, it was nothing serious. People missed lectures all the time. Someone said she transferred. Someone else said she dropped out. The explanation shifted depending on who you asked. But then another girl vanished, and another. Still, no one said the word missing out loud, saying it would make it real, saying it would mean something was wrong. Professor John addressed us one morning. "I know there's been talk," he said calmly, "but stress can make imaginations run wild. Focus on your studies. Fear is contagious." His words soothed the room. I felt foolish for being uneasy. Adults knew better. Teachers knew better. Except Paul didn't look soothed. He was sitting in the back, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were pale. His eyes weren't on Professor John's face. They were on his hands, watching them, studying them. That unsettled me more than the rumors ever had. Things escalated slowly, the way rot spreads in silence. Paul started appearing whenever Professor John spoke to female students, not directly interrupting, just hovering nearby, lingering. Once, when Professor John was explaining something to me after class, Paul walked past us 3 times in under a minute. It felt deliberate. I told myself he was unstable. Everyone else did. One afternoon, I caught him standing outside Professor John's office. The door was closed. Paul wasn't knocking. He was listening, his ear inches from the wood. "What are you doing?" I asked, sharper than I meant to. He flinched like I'd struck him. "Nothing," he said too quickly. His eyes darted down the hallway, then back at the door. "You shouldn't spy on teachers," I said. "I'm not spying," he replied, his voice low. The door opened. Professor John stepped out, smiling warmly, as if he hadn't noticed anything unusual at all. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Paul stared at him. For a moment, just one, I thought he might attack him. His jaw tightened, his fists trembled. Then he walked away without a word. Professor John sighed softly. "I worry about that boy," he said. "Isolation can do terrible things to the mind." I nodded. I believed him. That night, I stayed late at the library. Finals were coming, and I wanted to do well. When I packed my things and stepped outside, the campus was almost empty. That's when I saw Paul. He was standing under a broken light, half his face swallowed by shadow. I froze. He took a step toward me, then another. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Claire," he said. My name sounded wrong in his mouth. "You shouldn't be alone," he continued. "Not at night." Every instinct screamed danger. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "I pay attention," he replied. I backed away. He seemed to realize how it looked, because he stopped advancing. "Just be careful," he said. "Please." Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the dark. I stood there shaking, convinced I had just encountered something broken, something dangerous. After that night near the library, sleep stopped coming easily. Every sound outside my dorm room felt louder. Every footstep in the hallway felt intentional. I replayed Paul's voice in my head, "You shouldn't be alone," over and over, until the warning stopped sounding like concern and started sounding like a promise. I told myself I was being dramatic. That fear had sharpened my imagination. That was what Professor John would have said. And when I told him about the encounter, that was exactly how he responded. "You did the right thing telling me," he said, folding his hands together on his desk. "Some people don't understand boundaries. It's good you're aware." He didn't look surprised. That should have bothered me. But instead, I felt relieved, like I had handed my fear to someone capable of carrying it. "I don't think he's dangerous," he added carefully, as if choosing each word with compassion. "But unpredictable people can still cause harm without needing to." Unpredictable. That word followed Paul like a shadow. By the end of the week, everyone knew about the library incident, though not as it truly happened. Stories mutate when passed from mouth to mouth. By the time it reached the cafeteria, Paul hadn't warned me. He had cornered me. By the time it reached my dorm floor, he had threatened me. No one asked me directly what happened. They didn't need to. They already had a version they preferred. And then another girl disappeared. Her name was Lila. She sat 2 rows behind me in Professor John's class. She was the kind of pretty that drew attention without trying. The last time I saw her, she was laughing softly while Professor John leaned over her desk, pointing something out in her notebook. "She's lucky," someone whispered. "He really looks out for her." Lila never showed up to class again. This time, the word missing was spoken. Campus security posted notices. The dean gave a speech about cooperation and calm. Police officers appeared in hallways, their radios crackling softly as they spoke in low voices. Fear settled into the walls, and fear needs somewhere to go. People started watching Paul. It wasn't official. No one said, "We think it's him." They didn't have to. Every glance lingered too long. Every whisper stopped when he walked by. If something went missing, a bag, a notebook, a jacket, eyes flicked in his direction. Paul didn't help himself. If anything, he became worse. He started showing up everywhere I was. Not beside me, never beside me, but close enough that I could feel his presence like pressure against my skin. If I turned suddenly, I'd catch him looking away. If I stayed still, I could swear he was watching me. Once I found a small cut on my palm after class. I didn't remember how it got there. The skin had split shallowly, a thin red line already drying. Blood. The word echoed in my mind, dragging me back to that sentence I'd thought the night Paul spoke to me. It would end with blood. I wrapped my hand in tissue and hurried out of the room. Paul was standing in the hallway. I gasped before I could stop myself. His eyes dropped instantly to my hand. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing," I snapped, hiding it behind my back. "Why are you always here?" He hesitated. For the first time, he looked unsure, like he was weighing whether to speak or retreat. "Has he been talking to you?" Paul asked quietly. My stomach twisted. "Who?" He glanced toward Professor John's classroom door. Something in his expression, fear maybe, made my pulse spike. "That's none of your business," I said. "Leave me alone." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand." "Then explain," I challenged. He opened his mouth. Then the door behind him opened. Professor John stepped out, his gaze flicking instantly to my wrapped hand. "Claire, are you all right?" he asked, concern etched into every line of his face. Paul turned slowly. For a moment, the hallway felt too narrow, the air too thin. The two of them stood facing each other, and I had the strangest sensation, like I was watching animals recognize a threat. "I'm fine," I said quickly. Paul," Professor John interrupted gently, "you should head back to class." Paul didn't move. You're scaring her. Professor John continued, his voice calm but firm. Paul laughed once. It was short, bitter. Of course I am, he said. That's the idea, right? My heart slammed against my ribs. What do you mean by that? Professor John asked. Paul's eyes flicked to me. For a second I thought he might say something that would change everything. Instead, he stepped back. Nothing, he muttered and walked away. That afternoon, campus security questioned him. Someone said they found him near the old science building late at night. Someone else claimed he had scratches on his arms. No one could explain where the scratches came from, but it didn't need to. Scratches meant struggle. Scratches meant guilt. Paul didn't deny being there. I walk, he said flatly. At night. That was enough. By evening, people were avoiding him openly. Chairs were moved when he sat down. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Someone scribbled psycho on his locker in red marker. I told myself it made sense. The pattern fit too neatly not to believe. Silent, isolated, appearing near victims, watching women, warning me in the dark, all the pieces aligned. And yet, every time Professor John smiled at me, every time we asked how I was coping, I felt that pressure again, that invisible hand tightening around something fragile inside me. That night I stayed late again. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to prove I wasn't afraid. As I left the building, voices drifted from around the corner. Paul's voice. And another man's. I froze, pressing myself against the cold wall. I told you to stop interfering, the other voice said. I'm not interfering. I'm watching. There was a sharp sound, a scuffle, a breathless grunt, then silence. I heard footsteps retreating, fast, uneven. When I rounded the corner, Professor John was alone, straightening his jacket. His hand was bleeding. Just a little. A thin cut across the knuckle. Blood. Oh, he said when he saw me. You shouldn't be here. What happened? I whispered. He smiled gently. Paul lost his temper. I believed him. I wanted to. Behind the building, something dark soaked slowly into the concrete, catching the light like spilled ink. And somewhere deep inside me, a voice I wasn't ready to listen to yet began to scream. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, the way Professor John had calmly wiped the blood from his hand, the way he'd smiled as if violence were an inconvenience, not a warning. I told myself Paul had attacked him. That was the story everyone was already telling by Morton, polished and repeated until it felt solid enough to stand on. A teacher assaulted by a disturbed student. It sounded right, too right. By the next day, the stain behind the science building was gone. Scrubbed clean. Whatever had soaked into the concrete had been erased so thoroughly that I started to wonder if I'd imagined it. But the image stayed with me, vivid and heavy, like something lodged behind my eyes. Paul didn't come to class. Someone said he'd been taken in for questioning. Someone else said his parents had been contacted. No one sounded worried. If anything, people sounded relieved. You can feel it, right? A girl whispered to me during lunch, like the campers can finally breathe. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Professor John addressed us again. He looked tired now, pale beneath the fluorescent lights. I want you all to know, he said, that what happened yesterday is being handled. Please don't spread rumors. Fear only hurts innocent people. Innocent. The word scraped against something raw inside me. After class, he stopped me. Claire, he said softly. Are you all right after what you witnessed? I didn't see anything, I replied. He studied my face for a moment, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. That's probably for the best, he said finally. Sometimes the mind protects itself. His hand rested on my shoulder for just a second too long. I told myself it was gratitude, concern, nothing more. But when I left the classroom, my skin felt cold where he'd touched me. Paul reappeared 3 days later. He looked worse, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes. His posture, already withdrawn, had collapsed inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller. The whispers followed him everywhere, sharp and merciless. Murderer, psycho, freak. Someone threw a crumpled piece of paper at him in the hallway. It hit his chest and fell open at his feet. Drawn in red ink was a stick figure hanging from a noose. I watched him stare at it for a long time before stepping over it. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt safe. Instead, my stomach twisted. That afternoon, campus security made their presence known again. They stopped Paul outside the dorms, asking questions loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Where had he been the night Lila disappeared? Why was he always alone? Why did he follow people? I don't follow, Paul said quietly. I observe. That word earned him a shove against the wall. Don't get smart, the guard snapped. I stood frozen a few feet away, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to turn back, pretend I hadn't seen anything. Another part, smaller, quieter, wanted to scream that this was wrong. Paul's eyes met mine. There was no anger in them. No menace, just urgency. That night I found a note slipped under my dorm door. No name, no signature. Just 4 words, written in uneven block letters. He is running out of time. I didn't have to ask who he was. My hands shook as I folded the paper. I told myself it was another threat, another attempt by Paul to scare me. That was the easiest explanation, but deep down, I knew something didn't fit. I went to Professor John the next morning. He listened carefully as I showed him the note. His expression darkened, not with fear, but with disappointment. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, he said softly. To what? I asked. Escalation, he replied. People like pool. They don't like losing control. What should I do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. He smiled reassuringly. Stay close to people you trust. And Claire, if he approaches you again, tell someone immediately. That day, another girl failed to show up to class. This time there was no excuse, no transfer, no illness. She was gone. Panic spread fast now, no longer whispered but shouted. Parrots cooled, police cars parked openly outside buildings, and still the rumors circled back to Paul. They always did. Late that evening, I heard footsteps outside my dorm room, slow, careful. A shadow passed beneath the door, then a knock. My breath caught in my throat. Claire, a voice whispered. Please. It was Paul. Every instinct told me not to open the door, but I did. He looked terrified. Listen to me, he said urgently. You're not safe, not with him. I told you to stay away, I whispered. You're making everything worse. He grabbed my wrist, not hard but firm. That's exactly what he wants you to think, Paul said. His footsteps thundered down the hall. Paul released me instantly. Professor John appeared at the far end, his face a mask of concern. Claire? He called. Is everything all right? Paul stepped back slowly, hands raised. For a heartbeat, the 3 of us stood there, me between them, trembling. And in that moment I made a choice that would nearly kill me. He followed me, I said. Professor John moved fast. Security arrived. Paul was dragged away, shouting something I couldn't hear over the pounding of my heart. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, his final words echoed in my mind, words no one else seemed to hear. If you survive this, he had screamed, remember that you helped him. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the scream didn't stop. After Paul was taken away, the hallway felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean, like something messy had been wiped away before it could stain anyone else. Professor John walked me to my room that night. Campus security followed at a polite distance, their hands resting near their radios. I remember how safe I was supposed to feel, surrounded by authority, by adults who knew what they were doing. Yet my hands wouldn't stop shaking. You did the right thing, Professor John said gently as we stopped outside my door. I know that was hard. Paul's words still rang in my ears. If you survive this, remember that you helped him. I nodded anyway. I was scared, I said, because that part was true. He smiled at me with something close to pride. Fear keeps us alive. That night I dreamed of doors that wouldn't open and voices calling my name from behind walls. By morning, Paul was no longer just suspected. He was announced. A campus-wide notice was posted on bulletin boards and dorm entrances. It used careful language, a person of interest for the safety of students, but everyone understood what it meant. People stopped whispering. They pointed. Paul was barred from classes pending investigation. His locker was sealed, his dorm room searched. When someone asked what they found, the answer was always the same. Nothing yet. Yet, Professor John stayed. He canceled a lecture and replaced it with an open discussion about trauma, about how fear spreads, about how predators hide among us. He never said Paul's name, but every sentence bent in his direction. Sometimes, he said, pacing slowly in front of the room, the most dangerous people are those who feel unseen, those who believe the world owes them something. Students nodded. Some cried. One girl squeezed my hand. I felt sick. After class, Professor John asked me to stay behind. "You've been under a lot of stress," he said. "I want to make sure you're coping." He offered tea from a small kettle in his office. I noticed then how carefully arranged everything was. Books aligned perfectly, papers stacked, no clutter, no mess. Control, I thought. He likes control. The thought scared me, and I didn't know why. "You're very brave, Claire," he said, handing me the cup. "What you did may have saved lives." Paul's face flashed in my mind, the urgency, the fear. I almost dropped the cup. "Do you think he really did it?" I asked. Professor John didn't answer immediately. He sat across from me, his expression thoughtful. "I think," he said slowly, "that people like Paul don't see others as real, only as obstacles." The tea tasted bitter. That afternoon, flyers went up for another missing student. The campus atmosphere shifted from fear to something sharper, anger, and anger needed an outlet. Someone smashed Paul's locker door. Someone else spray-painted "Confess" across the wall near the science building. When a small vigil was held for the missing girls, Paul's name was whispered like a curse. I stood among them, holding a candle, feeling like a fraud. That night I heard a knock at my door. I didn't answer. Another knock. Louder. "Claire," a voice whispered. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't need to open the door to know who it was. "Paul, you can't keep doing this," I said through the wood, my voice barely steady. "They told you to stay away." "They lied to you," he replied. His voice was hoarse, strained, like he hadn't slept in days. "Listen to me, please." I shook my head, even though we couldn't see it. "He's isolating you," Paul said. "That's how he—" "Stop," I whispered. "Just stop." There was a long silence. Then Paul spoke again, quieter now. "When they find the bodies, remember this moment." Footsteps approached from down the hall. Paul cursed under his breath. "Please," he said one last time. "Don't trust him." Then he was gone. Security found me sitting on the floor, my back against the door, shaking uncontrollably. Professor John was called. He arrived quickly, too quickly. "He's persistent," he said gravely. "That's dangerous." I looked up at him. For the first time, a thought crossed my mind that I immediately tried to bury. Why was he always here? "I'll make sure he can't contact you again," Professor John said. And he did. The next day, Paul was transferred off campus. No one said where, no one asked. Life tried to return to normal, but the girls kept disappearing. And with Paul gone, there was no one left to blame, except the silence, and the man who stayed. When Paul was transferred off campus, the campus exhaled. You could feel it in the way people laughed a little louder in the cafeteria, in how doors stopped being checked twice before locking, in how professors resumed assigning group work as if nothing had fractured beneath us. The fear didn't disappear, not completely, but it dulled. Like a headache you convince yourself is gone because you're tired of acknowledging it. Everyone agreed on one thing: things will be better now. Paul had been the noise. Without him, there was silence. And silence felt like safety. I tried to tell myself that too. But at night, when the campus quieted and my thoughts grew louder, I realized something was missing. Not relief, not peace, but tension. The pressure that had always been there, humming beneath the surface, had suddenly vanished. It was like realizing the ticking clock you hated had stopped, and instead of comfort, all you felt was dread. The girls didn't stop disappearing. It just stopped being urgent. The announcements grew less frequent, more carefully worded. Delayed return, unconfirmed absence, personal leave faces faded from bulletin boards, candles burned out and weren't replaced. Professor John remained. He always did. He checked in on me daily now, never intrusively, never officially. Just gentle concern. A question after class. A note slipped onto my desk reminding me to eat, to rest, to breathe. "You've been through a lot," he told me one afternoon as we walked across campus together. "It's normal to feel disoriented after trauma." I wanted to ask him why he didn't seem disoriented at all. Instead, I nodded. Without Paul, I had no one else to focus my fear on. And fear, when it has nowhere to go, turns inward. I began doubting my own memories. The blood behind the science building pools urgency. His final words. "Remember that you helped him." Helped who? A murderer? That was what made sense. That was what everyone believed. And belief, when shared by enough people, starts to feel like fact. One evening, while studying in the library, I noticed something odd. A girl sat 2 tables away from me, staring at the same page for nearly an hour. Her hands shook. Every few minutes she glanced toward the exit as if expecting someone to appear. When our eyes met, she flinched. Later, as I packed my things, she brushed past me and whispered, barely moving her lips, "He listens." I turned, but she was already gone. That night, I dreamed of ears pressed to doors. Professor John suggested I start meeting him privately once a week. "Just to talk," he said. "No pressure. Sometimes it helps to have a structured space." His office felt different after hours. The lights dimmer, the walls closer. I noticed things I hadn't before, the faint metallic smell beneath the books, the locked cabinet I'd never seen opened, the way he always positioned himself between me and the door. "You're safe here," he said once when I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. During one session, I asked him a question that surprised even me. "Do you think Paul will ever confess?" Professor John looked at me carefully. "Confession," he said, "is a complicated thing. Some people confess to crimes they didn't commit. Others never confess at all." "Which do you think he is?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Does it matter?" It did, but I didn't say that. Another girl vanished. This time I knew her. We had shared notes once. She had sat beside me during one of Professor John's lectures, her hand trembling as she wrote. No vigil was held. No announcement was made. It was as if the campus had learned how to forget. That was when the phone calls started. Not to me, to Professor John. I noticed them during our sessions. His office phone would ring, once, twice. He would silence it without answering, his expression tightening for just a fraction of a second before smoothing out again. "Important?" I asked once. "Just interruptions," he replied. "We were talking." I don't know why, but that unsettled me more than anything else had. One evening, I left his office later than usual. The hallway was empty, lights buzzing softly overhead. As I passed the science wing, I heard voices. I stopped. Professor John's voice drifted through a half-open door, low, controlled. "You said you understood the arrangement," he said. Another voice replied, female, trembling. "I did everything you asked." "Not everything," he said calmly. "You spoke to someone." A sharp inhale, a muffled sob. "I won't make that mistake again," she pleaded. There was a pause. Then Professor John spoke again, softer now. "Good girl." My stomach turned. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. My foot brushed against something on the floor, a piece of paper. I picked it up without thinking. It was a list. Names, some crossed out, some circled. At the bottom, written smaller than the rest, was one name that made my blood run cold. Claire. I didn't remember returning to my dorm. I only remember sitting on my bed, staring at the door, waiting for a knock that didn't come. Paul was gone. The noise was gone. And for the first time, I understood something I hadn't been ready to before. Silence doesn't mean safety. Sometimes it means the predator has learned how to hunt without being heard. After I found my name on that list, I stopped sleeping altogether. Every sound became a threat. Every shadow stretched too far. I replayed the memory again and again. The calm in Professor John's voice. The way he said, "Good girl," the list folded carelessly as if it were nothing more than a grocery reminder. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always is until there isn't. The next morning, the paper was gone. I searched my bag, my books, the trash bin outside my dorm. Nothing. I convinced myself I had imagined it, that stress had finally broken something in my mind. That was what Professor John suggested when I brought up my unease, carefully, indirectly. "You've been under extreme strain," he said, watching me closely. "The mind fills gaps when it's desperate for answers." I almost asked him if desperation could invent handwriting identical to his. Almost. Instead, I let him talk. He began restructuring my days. It started innocently, adjusting my class schedule so I could avoid stress, suggesting I skip social events that might overwhelm me, encouraging me to spend more time in controlled environments. "You need routine," he said. "Predictability." Slowly, my world shrank. Friends stopped inviting me out. Some avoided me entirely, as if fear were contagious. Others whispered behind my back, speculating that I had been involved with Paul somehow, that I had known more than I'd admitted. Isolation wrapped around me like a second skin, and Professor John was always there to ease it. One afternoon, I noticed something strange. The campus medical building smelled different, metallic, sweet. I thought of the cabinet in his office, locked, always locked. Another girl came to me in the restroom. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. "He said you were strong," she whispered, "that you understood." My throat tightened. Who? She shook her head violently. I can't say. She left without washing her hands. That night I dreamed of knives laid out neatly on white cloth. Paul's name was mentioned less and less, like a rumor that had outlived its usefulness. Officially, the investigation stalled. Unofficially, people believed what they wanted to believe. I tried to reach him once. I don't know why. Guilt, maybe. Or curiosity. Or something colder. I asked campus security where he had been transferred. They wouldn't tell me. He's no longer your concern, one of them said. But I felt his absence like a missing limb. The next time Professor John called me to his office, it was late. Too late. You didn't have to come, he said pleasantly, but I'm glad you did. I noticed then that his desk was cleared. No papers, no books. The kettle was gone. You're special, Claire, he continued. You see things others don't. My heart pounded. I just want to feel normal again, I said. He smiled. Normal is overrated. He stood, walking slowly around the desk, stopping just behind my chair. I could feel his breath near my ear. You trust me, don't you? The question wasn't gentle. It was a test. Yes, I said. The lie tasted like blood. Good, he replied. Then you won't mind helping me. Helping. The word struck something deep in my chest. I remembered Paul's voice, hoarse and desperate. Remember that you helped him. Professor John handed me a folder. Inside were forms, medical consent documents, my name printed neatly at the top. Just signatures, he said. Precautionary, in case of emergencies. My hands shook as I held the pen. What kind of emergency? I asked. He watched me carefully. The kind no one else can prepare you for. The office phone rang. He didn't silence it this time. He answered. Yes, he said quietly. She's ready. I dropped the pen. Professor John looked down at it, then back at me, his expression unreadable. You should go, he said calmly. Get some rest. I stumbled out of the office, my legs barely holding me upright. As I reached the end of the hallway, I heard his voice again, speaking into the phone, words floating after me like a curse. Tomorrow, he said, we begin. I ran. Back in my dorm room, I locked the door and slid down against it, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't unclench them. Paul was gone. No one was watching anymore. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood the truth I had been running from. I hadn't been protected. I had been prepared. I didn't run far. I didn't know where to go. The campus at night was a maze of dark windows and familiar paths that suddenly felt hostile, like they no longer belonged to me. Every building looked the same. Every shadow felt deliberate. By the time I reached my dorm again, my lungs burned and my legs shook so badly I nearly collapsed at the entrance. I locked myself inside and stayed awake until morning. Tomorrow we begin. Professor John's words replayed in my head on a loop, stripped of tone, stripped of context, until they became something mechanical. Clinical, like the start of a procedure. By morning I had made a decision. I would not meet him alone again. It was a small act of defiance, almost pathetic in its simplicity, but it was the only control I felt I still had. I skipped class. I avoided his building. When his assistant came looking for me, I pretended to be sick. He didn't confront me. That should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me. People like Professor John didn't let go so easily. They adjusted. And he did. The changes were subtle at first. My schedule was altered without my request. Rooms I needed access to were suddenly locked. A notice appeared stating that certain areas were temporarily restricted for maintenance. The science wing. Always the science wing. I started watching the other girls. Not openly, never openly, but in reflections, through doorways across crowded rooms. I noticed how some of them moved with a careful stiffness, how they flinched when phones rang, how they avoided eye contact when Professor John passed. One afternoon, I sat beside a girl I barely knew during a lecture. Her hands were trembling so badly her pen scratched jagged lines across the page. "Are you okay?" I whispered. She didn't look at me. "Don't talk to me," she murmured. "Please." After class, I followed her into the stairwell. "I just want to help," I said. That word again. Help. She spun on me, her face twisted with panic. "That's what he says." My stomach dropped. Before I could ask anything else, she shoved something into my hand and fled. A photograph. It showed a hospital bed. White sheets. Restraints. A partial reflection in a metal tray revealed a man standing just out of frame. I recognized the sleeve. Professor John's. I stuffed the photo into my pocket as footsteps echoed nearby. That night, someone slipped a note under my door. Different handwriting this time. Smaller. Careful. Do not fight him, it makes it worse. I sat on my bed, clutching the note, my thoughts spiraling. Paul had fought. Paul had interfered. Paul had made noise. And Paul was gone. The realization hit me slowly, painfully. He hadn't been reckless. He had been desperate. I started asking questions, quietly, indirectly. Who controlled access to certain rooms? Who approved schedule changes? Who handled private counseling sessions? The answer was always the same, Professor John. When I tried to speak to administration, I was redirected. When I tried to file a formal complaint, I was told I needed specific allegations. Names, dates, proof. I had none. Only fear. That evening I heard voices outside my door again. This time I didn't freeze. I pressed my ear to the wood. You said she was ready, a man's voice whispered. I said she was being prepared. Professor John replied calmly. There's a difference. And the others, they served their purpose. My hands shook so badly I had to brace myself against the wall. She's more complicated, he continued. But she understands, they always do. The footsteps moved away. I slid down onto the floor, bile rising in my throat. They. Always they. Never names. Never people. That night I dreamed of bodies folded into small, careful spaces. The next day, Professor John cornered me near the library. You've been avoiding me, he said mildly. I've been busy, I replied. He studied my face for a long moment, then smiled. I admire your independence, he said. It's why I chose you. My blood ran cold. Chose me for what? I asked. He leaned closer. You'll see. I turned and walked away before he could stop me. That was the moment I knew. There was no misunderstanding, no misinterpretation, and no one left to stop him, except me. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, something else became clear. Something I hadn't wanted to admit. Paul hadn't been trying to scare me. He had been trying to wake me up, and I had done the one thing that made it easier for the monster to reach me. I had helped silence him. Once you realize you are being hunted, everything changes. Every kindness becomes a test. Every routine becomes a path laid out for you by someone else. I stopped thinking in days and started thinking in exits. Where I could go, who might see me, how long it would take before someone noticed I was gone. Professor John noticed the shift immediately. You're tired, he said the next time he spoke to me, his voice soft with concern. Paranoia is a common response to prolonged stress. Paranoia. The word was a dismissal dressed as compassion. I think I need a break, I said carefully. Maybe go home for a few days. His smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes hardened. That wouldn't be wise, he replied. Running away without resolving fear only makes it stronger. I'm not running, I said. No, he agreed. You're hesitating. That night an email arrived in my inbox. Mandatory evaluation. Science wing, 9 p.m. mandatory. No explanation, no signature, just a room number. I knew what it was the moment I read it, the trap. I considered not going. I considered packing my things and leaving campus entirely. But fear isn't just something that chases you. It corners you. If I didn't go, he would come to me. If I resisted openly, I would disappear quietly like the others. At least if I went, I would see it coming. The science wing was almost completely dark when I arrived. Only a few overhead lights buzzed weakly, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. My footsteps echoed too loudly, each one announcing my presence. The door was already open. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. No windows, white walls, a faint metallic smell that made my stomach churn. Equipment lined the counters, things I didn't recognize, things I didn't want to. Professor John stood near the back, his sleeves rolled up. You came, he said, pleased. I didn't have a choice, I replied. He tilted his head. You always have a choice. You just finally made the right one. The door closed behind me with a soft click. That sound still visits me in my dreams. You've been fighting this, he continued calmly, walking toward me. That's natural, but resistance only prolongs suffering. What do you want from me? I asked. He smiled, understanding. He reached for my arm. I stepped back, and that was when the lights went out. Not all of them, just enough to plunge the room into uneven shadow. A sound came from behind him. A crash, metal hitting the floor. Professor John turned sharply. Step away from her. The voice was hoarse, familiar. Paul emerged from the darkness. He looked thinner than before, bruised, exhausted. But his eyes were clear, focused in a way I'd never seen before. My first instinct was terror. Of course it was. Every lie I'd swallowed rose up at once, screaming that this was it, that the monster had followed me into the dark. Professor John recovered quickly. "Paul," he said calmly, "this isn't necessary." Paul laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You said that to my sister, too." My breath caught. "Sister," said Professor John's jaw tightened. "Leave," he said quietly. "You don't understand what you're interrupting." Paul stepped closer. "I understand exactly what you do in rooms like this." Professor John turned to me. "Claire," he said gently, "you need to stay calm. He's dangerous." Paul didn't look at me. "He told you I was a psycho," Paul said. "That I was obsessed, that I was unstable." He finally met my eyes. "Did he ever tell you why I enrolled here?" I shook my head, barely breathing. "My sister," Paul continued, his voice shaking now, "was found dead in a bathtub 2 years ago. They said it was suicide. She had no history of depression, no note, no explanation." Professor John lunged. Paul was faster. The sound of the struggle was violent, grunts, scraping shoes, metal clattering as bodies collided with tables. Professor John fought with a precision that terrified me. This wasn't panic, this was practice. He slammed Paul against the wall. Paul cried out as something cracked. "Run!" Paul shouted at me. "Claire, run!" I didn't. I couldn't. Professor John turned his head slowly toward me, his expression changing, shedding the last trace of the man I thought I knew. Cold, annoyed. "You should have stayed ignorant," he said. He reached into his pocket. I moved without thinking, grabbed the nearest object, a metal tray, and swung it. It connected with his shoulder. He roared, staggering back. Paul tackled him. They crashed to the floor, fists flying, breath ragged, bodies slamming into cabinets. Professor John clawed for Paul's eyes. Paul drove his elbow into John's throat. Blood splattered across the white tiles. Real blood. Not imagined. Not symbolic. Professor John screamed, not in pain, but in rage. "You don't get to ruin this," he snarled. He reached for a scalpel on the counter. I saw it before Paul did. "Paul," I screamed. He turned just in time. The blade slashed his arm instead of his chest. I grabbed John's wrist. He was stronger than he looked. His grip crushed my fingers as he twisted, forcing the scapula toward me. Our faces were inches apart. "You were supposed to understand," he hissed. "You were perfect." Paul slammed into him again, knocking the scalpel loose. It skidded across the floor. I kicked it away. The fight ended messily. Ugly. Human. Professor John lay gasping on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his composure finally shattered. Paul collapsed beside the wall, clutching his arm, breathing hard. Silence filled the room. I stared at them both, my entire body shaking. Everything I thought I knew had just broken open. Paul looked up at me. "I tried to warn you," he said weakly. Tears blurred my vision. "I know," I whispered. And for the first time since this began, I understood who the real enemy had always been. But the truth had come too late to stop what he'd already done. I could barely breathe, my stomach twisting as I tried to focus. The flickering fluorescent light cast shadows across the walls, the bodies, and John himself, finally revealed in all his monstrous truth. He was still alive, gasping and thrashing weakly beneath our combined weight, eyes wide with rage and disbelief. "You think this ends here?" He spat at us. Blood streaked across his face. "Do you understand what you've done? You're nothing." Paul's grip tightened. "You're the nothing, John. You killed my sister, you killed everyone else, and you thought you could get away with it." I gritted my teeth. My hands shook, but my resolve burned. Every missing girl, every whispered rumor, every moment of fear, it all culminated here. John's eyes flicked to me. "You," he hissed, "I chose you. You were perfect. I prepared you." Prepared. That word had haunted me for weeks. I felt my fear shift into something sharper. Rage. The power to survive. "No," I said, voice shaking but steady. "You didn't prepare me. You made me stronger." He laughed, short, bitter, insane. "Stronger? You'll break." "Maybe," I replied, "but not tonight." Paul and I exchanged a quick glance, silent communication. We knew what needed to happen. John lunged, fury exploding from him like a living thing. He shoved Paul off with terrifying strength, sending him crashing into a steel counter. I reacted before thinking, grabbing the nearest metal tray and swinging it like a bat. It connected with John's side with a sickening crack. He roared, clutching himself, and turned toward me with a knife still in hand. Time slowed. I saw the madness in his eyes. I saw the countless lies, the calculated cruelty, the satisfaction he took in fear and control. and I realized he had no plan for us. He had never faced resistance like this. He slashed toward me. I barely ducked. The knife grazed my shoulder, a shallow cut that burned but didn't stop me. I grabbed a heavy scalpel from a counter, gripping it like a lifeline. Paul recovered, rolling to his feet, and together we lunged at him. He swung wildly, but our movements synchronized. Duck, block, strike. The fight became a chaotic dance of violence. Blood sprayed, metal clattered, screams echoed off the walls. He was fast, but desperation makes people predictable. Paul struck him across the ribs, winding him, while I stabbed the scalpel into his forearm to make him drop the knife. John screamed, a sound that would haunt me for life, thrashing and clawing as Paul pinned him down again. "You can't win," he shrieked. "We already have," Paul growled. I grabbed a heavy chain from a nearby shelf. Wrapping it around his torso, I helped Paul pull it tight. John struggled, his face twisted, but he couldn't break free. The fight felt endless. Every moment was pure survival. But slowly, inch by inch, we took control. Finally, John stopped struggling. He lay there, gasping, bloody, defeated. His eyes, once sharp with malice, now darted, desperately seeking some escape that didn't exist. "You," he whispered, voice cracking. "You don't understand. Everything was necessary." I shook my head. "Necessary? You destroyed lives, you lied, killed, and tortured. Nothing about you was necessary." The realization hit him last of all. No threats, no manipulation, no fear could save him now. Paul and I stepped back. The adrenaline still coursed through our veins, shaking our hands, our bodies, our minds. We looked at each other, exhausted, terrified, victorious. I realized something as I gazed at John, chained and powerless. The fear that had consumed me for months, the silence that had suffocated the campus, the isolation, the manipulation, it all ended here. But the truth remained. The horror remained. The memory would remain forever. We found the hidden storage rooms, the evidence of his crimes. Photographs, files, names, bodies hidden carefully, methodically, like trophies of a monster's obsession. Police arrived later and John was taken away. He screamed, threatened, tried to manipulate even then. But this time, no one listened. Paul stayed by my side, silent, steady, not a threat, not a predator. My protector in the shadows all along. I finally understood everything. The misleading whispers, the false suspicions, the slow burn of terror. John had been the smiling predator. Paul had been the misunderstood hero. And I had survived. We walked out of the science wing together, the morning sun filtering through the windows. I felt the first real sense of relief I'd had in months, even though the images of what we'd seen, what we'd fought against, would never leave me. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the world would never look the same. But for the first time, I also knew that fear could be faced and monsters could be stopped. Paul's hand brushed against mine briefly. Silent acknowledgement. We had won, but the lesson lingered. Evil hides behind smiles. Danger can wear the guise of kindness. And sometimes the only way to survive is to trust what your instincts already know.